Okay, good afternoon. It's Power Hour. Yes, the monthly topics. And we really appreciate you attending today. Uh, if you have questions or comments about future Power Hour topics, please make sure that you get with the folks that helped you to get here today. There is a calendar, and we have, I think, pretty much most of 2020 lined up. So these are fun to do. They're fast, they're engaging, and they're powerful. So thank you again. I'm going to kind of preface the conversation today about implicit bias that there's really no way that we can cover implicit bias in an hour. And so bear with me. We designed it so that we get you the things that get you to think about you first, and then know that the longer version of this program extends itself into, okay, after me and I understand me and my conscious and unconscious bias, now what? Okay, so then we translate and say, okay, let's transition to how that understanding or lack of understanding of bias could impact you in the workplace. And then we spend some time there. It won't be a lot, but we'll spend some time there. And then we'll go one step further and go into, okay, so how does this impact in the greater community, the community that you live in, the national stage, and some of the implications that we're seeing associated with racial injustice out there today. So unfortunately, I don't have 2 days to go through each one, so please bear with me. I'm going to go through some of the concepts that are important to know, but not what we're going to focus on today. So bear with me if I am going too fast, or you need to know a little more of one of the kind of the secondary concepts, stop me and we'll talk about it. If it's important to you, it's important enough for me to stop, and we can always shift a gear and maybe skip a slide or two to help make sure you get what you want out of this session. All right. So a little bit of housekeeping here. Please be sure to put your name and the email address in the chat box as we get started. We'd like to know who you are, but we also want to know if you are interested in any information that came out of the subject today, the subject matter. We're happy to send whatever information you need from us to ensure that you can do some homework on your own afterwards, and we're happy to share everything that we have here today to ensure that you are educated in what we're talking about today. So why is it important to learn about our biases? I think I might have mentioned that there's a lot of stuff going on right now, from politics to COVID-19 and everything in between. And it's creating a tremendous amount of anxiety out in our world. It really has caused a tremendous amount of worry, angst, pain, anger, and fear. And when we think about some of the challenges that are out there relative to bias, we think almost exclusively, initially, in terms of how that implicit, explicit bias affects us or impacts us in our race relations. And it's a sad commentary that we've been at this for a long time. And you're going to listen to Dr. King speak to that. And so I start with this because this truly is, for me, as a person of color in that marginalized community, and for others, something that's near and dear to our heart relative to seeking out equality. And sometimes we make decisions as humans based on all the biases we're going to learn about today. And frankly, we could be either intentionally, like they were in the 50s, outright racism, where you segregate people based on their skin color, or implicitly through your thoughts and your conversations and your behaviors. And so we're still struggling with today. So let's listen to Dr. King, who will kick us off for this hour.
But isn't that part of the dilemma now? that people knew that Negroes were being. But isn't that part of the dilemma now? That people knew that Negroes were being denied what was guaranteed to them by the Constitution, by the fact that they were citizens of this country. Then when they were given those rights, do you feel the white community said, well, we've given them all that we have, now it's up to them?
Well, I think the dilemma is much deeper, and I think one during this period of transition has to be very honest with America. And honesty impels me to admit that America has broad racist elements still alive. Racism is still existing in American society in many areas of the society, North and South. And the other thing is that there has never been a single, solid, determined commitment of large segments of white America on the whole question of racial equality. I think we have to see that vacillation has always existed, ambivalence has always existed, and this to me is the so-called white backlash. It's merely a new name for an old phenomenon. I see the white backlash as a continuation of the same ambivalence and vacillation of white America on the whole question of racial justice that has existed since the founding of our nation. I think the other thing that we must see at this time is that many of the people who supported us in Selma, in Birmingham, were really outraged about the extremist behavior toward Negroes. But they were not at that moment, and they are not now, committed to genuine equality for Negroes. It's much easier to integrate a lunch counter than it is to guarantee an annual income, for instance, to get rid of poverty for Negroes and all poor people. It's much easier to integrate a bus than it is to make genuine integration a reality and quality education a reality in our schools. It's much easier to integrate even a public park than it is to get rid of slums. And I think we are in a new era, a new phase of the struggle, where we have moved from a struggle for decency, which characterized our struggle for 10 or 12 years, to a struggle for genuine equality. And this is where we're getting the resistance, because there was never any intention to go this far. People were reacting to Bull Connor and to Jim Clark rather than acting in good faith for the realization of genuine equality.
Very powerful words by Dr. King. And again, just as the title of this presentation suggests, right, the importance of understanding implicit bias and its effect on race relations. Now, clearly, there are a lot of other implications from implicit or explicit bias having nothing to do with race, but today our conversation will be focused on race relations. So there are quite a few of them. Thank you for allowing me to give you that introduction. My name is Ben Negron. Delighted to be here with you today. Founder of HOLA, Hispanics of Lenawee Alliance, Executive Director. We've been in the business of supporting social justice and speaking on behalf of racial injustice in the Lenawee County area since 2006. I'm proud to tell you that the Aden Public School System uses our group made up of some 25, 30 business people in the community, business owners and proprietors. But we give back through conversations like this and how to bring the two sides together. At the Aden Public Schools, we've enjoyed the opportunity to be the translator service of choice to help students from Spanish-speaking homes and their parents be able to understand parent-teacher conferences. Now, clearly that's going to be very different this year with COVID, but nonetheless, we're proud to say that we give back in a positive and professional way, and we hope to deliver this training on a very critical subject in the same manner. So I also want to just kind of start off by telling you that this is going to be a journey in the next 40 minutes or so. There is no way that I can go through this without starting at the beginning, right? And despite this process, this project, this presentation being built off of some 78 scientists, academics, psychologists, and other experts in the field, including utilizing studies that have been touted by almost all implicit and explicit bias experts, the California Law Review, where they studied how these biases affect people in the criminal justice system, and thereby you make the link into race relations. But you should know that we are going to spend a tremendous amount of time listening to and hearing from folks that are experts in the field. Dr. Jerry Kang, for example, Anthony Greenwald, Mahazrin Banaji. These are folks that just about everybody out there, whether they're in academia or they're instructors like we are teaching the subject matter to the people, everyone points to them, and their information is simply not dated, as you will see very soon. So just wanted to lay the framework for where did we get the information, and where I could, I tried to put all of the links to anything that you might need right directly on the tile, so that if you want to do some digging deeper, you're welcome to do so. There are a lot of different types of biases. I don't think I could have this conversation without at least touching on, and we won't spend a lot of time, the different types of biases that fall under kind of that broader term cognitive bias. Okay, that's kind of the umbrella term. And we could spend weeks learning about each one of these, days, and turn this into, a 2-week, 4-hour, 3 days a week type sessions, but we're not going to do that. We don't have the time. So you may hear repetition. It's okay. It's by design. We got to hear some concepts quickly, and then so that we don't forget them, we'll see them again. And you may see some studies that seem like they're repetitive. They're not really. The idea is to keep implicit and explicit concepts in our mind. So I'm going to pepper the conversation with that. It may look like you've seen that before, and that's by design. So let's quickly just go into some of the other biases that are out there, just so that we familiarize with them. Please take notes if you want to learn more about them. So there's the actor-observer bias, and this is just a quick example of that is a tendency to attribute your own actions to external causes while attributing other people's behaviors to internal causes. And here's a great example of the actor-observer bias. Say you have high cholesterol levels due to genetics, and the actor-observer bias then says that you consider others who have high levels of cholesterol due to poor diets, lack of exercise, having some non-genetic related reasons why people are have that high cholesterol. Let me see here. I believe there's a chat. So okay, thank you. A little choppy. Very good. I will. I'll slow her down because the signal is maybe causing me not to be heard. But there's anchoring bias. This is the tendency to rely too heavily on the very first piece of information that you learn. So here's a good example. Let's just say that you learn the average price for a car is of a certain value. You will think, this is with anchoring, you'll think that any amount below that is considered a good deal. And perhaps what can happen in a situation like that is you just don't dig for more. You don't search for better deals. You don't question, why the first price might have been higher than what you've seen elsewhere to begin with, right? So anchoring bias is relying too heavily on that very first piece of information. Now, I can't go through all of these because there's quite a few of them, and I want to get them all into these next 2 slides. Here's confirmation bias. And very simply, it's favoring information that conforms to your existing beliefs and discounting those, or any evidence, by the way, that doesn't conform. So evidence being data, studies, research, true and proven, out of sight. You don't want to have anything to do with them. So that's a easy one to understand there. Attentional bias, there's availability heuristic. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this one here that just came up, called the functional fixedness. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I think if there's anything that we all tend to do in one part of our life or another, is this one. And we're not always necessarily conscious of it, or maybe sometimes we are, but let me just walk you through this. Functional fixedness is a tendency to see objects as only having one particular way to work. Now, let's just say, I want to make sure you can see this. Can you see this hammer okay? Give me a thumbs up in the chat. Let's just say that you needed to put this frame behind you for a Zoom class. Let's just say that. And you're out of time, your class is coming up, and you don't have a hammer. Functional fixedness says that this screwdriver will never work for driving a nail here and a nail over here to hang this for your Zoom class. Now you say, okay, Ben, well, that's, you know, it happens a lot to a lot of people. And I would just say this. Here's where there's a tendency for that bias to creep into the workspace and other environments. So let me just stop for a minute and say, if you are in work and you are a leader at work and you have to promote someone and you look across the landscape of qualified people with similar competencies, how do you think functional fixedness could creep into that? And I'll take your responses verbally. So let's go ahead and unmute and you tell me how you see functional fixedness could play a part in the workspace when you need to promote somebody.
It's Maureen. I'm sorry, I'm still a little confused. Can you clarify it for me?
Sure. So in the workspace, let's say I have a person that is really, really good at customer service. But has zero training in cutting meat, but they're a great leader of people. And you're looking to, say, replace the meat department manager. This person here has great customer service skills, but has never cut a piece of meat. Would you consider that person necessarily as someone to be successful in leading the team in the meat department? I hope that helps.
Oh my gosh, it's a good question. I guess my gut feeling is, yeah, I would, because they're that customer service person. I know, I can see your reaction, but I can understand how people who have the skills of meat cutting would see me as being biased toward, or maybe biased against them. It's a good question. I guess I would think that their leadership skills outweigh their physical skills in this instance.
Absolutely. And you nailed it, because I dropped leader in there a couple of times on purpose, because really what we're looking for is someone to lead the team. I already have the meat cutters.
Right.
Now, that person likely should eventually learn some of those meat cutting skills, right? How to use the bandsaw, how to use a knife, those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, what can happen too often if we are functionally fixed is it will never give a chance to that individual, because our perception is that the only purpose that person serves as a leader is serving as a customer service leader. And that's the kind of that's that gap where we have to give people an opportunity to look at the competencies within the leadership structure, not always or necessarily or exclusively in this case, around the function of the jobs that they do. And I hope that makes sense.
Thank you for explaining that. The light bulb just went out above my head. You explained it very well.
All right, awesome, thank you. So again, the reason I pick on this one is because, you know, where else do you think functional fixedness, I just gave you an example of functional fixedness in the workplace, and I also included, you know, in a bind. I know that the screwdriver is used to drive in screws this way, but guess what I did today? I used the head of it to hammer in a nail to get this baby up. So let's extend that to how we might see this out in the community. Can you give me an example of where you think that we might get a little kind of pigeonholed into a functional fixedness in the larger landscape?
I think you just gave a great example.
Any ideas?
I think you just gave a great example with the screwdriver and a hammer. I'm a nurse and I do bedside care, and so you just kind of cleared things up for me, because it's not unusual for us to have a manager who maybe doesn't have, I'm a labor and delivery nurse, who maybe doesn't have labor and delivery experience. And so I think sometimes we wonder why she got the job. Why is she my manager when she doesn't have any labor and delivery experience? But you cleared that up for me, because maybe she possesses the qualities of leadership, and that was what was important in that job. That you've just,
yeah, absolutely.
you really cleared it up.
I love it. So Maureen, I got to tell you a story real quick, and because it's kind of related to functional fixedness. So 2006, major injury to my leg. No one could figure out what was going on. About, I don't know, something that started as the tip of my finger here, something that started as the tip of my finger in my lower shin, as a bruise, turned into a pancake-sized flesh-eating wound. It was hamburger if you looked into my leg, and I was in the hospital for many, many days, and nothing would grow on the Petri dish, no bacteria. And I was on gentamicin. I was on such heavy doses of antibiotics that my organs were beginning to malfunction, okay? The guy comes in, this is the surgeon, and the night before my incident with the nurse, he basically says, we've exhausted ourselves. By then they're all covered with, you know, with all the hazmat suits, because back then they didn't know what was wrong with this guy on the 7th floor, and his leg keeps eating away. About 9 o'clock the evening later, I'm in the throes of massive pain. I was in a morphine drip. A nurse comes up, and she was a wound care nurse. She's from the ProMedica system. I'll never, ever, and I've forgotten the names of everybody but the surgeon and this woman. Her name is Jill Bick. So Jill comes up, my leg's all wrapped up. It's on one of these, you know, these contraptions where they keep the leg up. And I'm in deep pain, and they had just come in to clean it, which is like really bad, painful. And she says, oh, you know, you've just gone through this, but would you let me do it? And in my mind is like, just don't hurt me.
Right.
Don't poke me. I just want to look at it, is all she said. So she did. She opened up the bandage, you know, and she sees this big wound, and she starts to look very closely around the edges of the skin that had been eaten away. And she says, I don't want to say that you haven't been mistreated. I feel like you haven't been completely treated. Have you? This looks to me like something called pyoderma gangrenosum. And so I'd never heard of that before, and she explained it all to me. Autoimmune system. Anytime I get, you know, bruises that are in my lowers, it's gonna the inflammation is what my white blood cells go attack, and the more they eat, the more they inflame. So it's just this vicious cycle. Yeah. Well, no wonder nothing would grow on a Petri dish, because it wasn't bacteria; it was my own body. My point in telling you this is that I looked at her like, and I had this bias. I just got to tell you. Okay, so this guy hands me a catalog for, you know, prosthetics yesterday and tells me they might have to cut it because if it gets into my bone, forget about it.
Yeah.
What and because of that nurse, she was able to have the surgeon make himself vulnerable and say, you know what, we're gonna go with what Jill Bick said. And today I'm proud to tell you, I walk around, I have the leg, I have a big, beautiful, massive scar that I'm proud of because it helps me to say nurses matter, you know, and I've always been a big nurse, but it does play into this implicit bias in the sense that, like, if a surgeon says, who's a nurse to say, right?
Yeah.
And that's in your world. Oftentimes we don't give enough credit or we have something biased against nurses just purely from the standpoint of practice. You know, how could you know more than a surgeon? And
right.
So that's that functional fixedness that came out in that the nurse does the nurse's job and that there's a level to where that nurse can stay. But my goodness, the surgeon, he knows all. And yet here we are, you know, walking around on the leg, and I tell people that story as many times as I can. So we have to be careful not to pigeonhole people into whatever that role might be, right? Here she was a traveling wound care nurse and was able to save my leg. And
wow. That's an amazing story. That's an amazing story. And one of the things that I think of is I don't often think about the bias that patients might have towards us as nurses. I always think about how important it is as nurses not to see the patients in a biased way. But you just, again, this light bulb went off, and it really talks about that biases can go both ways and that we kind of have to have our minds open to that. Thank you. That was a great story.
Awesome. Thank you. I hope it helped to put kind of the pieces together on how these things can extend from our own personal, at home, you know, the way we're brought up. Now it's going out into the workplace, and how does it affect us being able to make good healthcare decisions, right? And
yeah.
Listen. So, all right. So let's couple more here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on every one of these. I'm going to be selective on the ones that I show you. Optimism bias is not bad. It's not. It's when you use optimism bias and how you use it in an unsensitive manner towards someone else. So let me give you an example. This bias leads you to believe that you are less likely to suffer from misfortune and more likely to attain success than your peers. So, you know, while optimism is great, let's be careful with what we do it or how we convey the message that I'm better than you. I had more education than you. I have more experience than you. I have more time in the chair than you. So therefore, this is why I get successes, you know, and until you have more time in this chair or, right? And so we have to just be careful that even though we would never, God forbid, say those words, I'm sure you've met people that we view as being high on themselves through their optimism. Pull myself up by the bootstraps. Get up and go no matter what. These are all optimism statements that if we're not careful how we say it and the context that we say it in could be implying, okay, here's implicit, that you're lesser than me because of my optimism. Here's the halo effect. This is a great one. I think we all do this. This is your overall impression of a personal influence that a person shares, or you know, let's just say that there's some kind of an impression, a first impression that delights you, whether it's looks, the person you're looking at looks good. And I don't mean that in any kind of derogatory or suggestive way. I just mean well cared for, you know, trimmed beard and mustache, you know, good looking, trimmed hair, well presented. Sometimes your overall impression with the halo effect influences how I think about their character, you see. And we have to be careful about that, because there are people that are out there in the world, and I don't have to share this with you, you've been out there living your life just like I have, who sometimes we know are getting away with things that you and I would not get away with because of the halo effect, right? And so that's the big thing is physical attractiveness is one of the top applications to the halo effect. We just have to be careful not to, we have to dig deeper and dig past that thing that we like, that we see, that's easy on the eyes, so to speak. This misinformation effect, I'll tell you, it's, I don't know if I do this or not. I have had to really think about this, so I wanted to ask you guys, you know, let me give you what it is, let me give you an example of it, and then you tell me if you've ever experienced it. So this is the tendency for a post-event information to interfere with the memory of the original event. Okay, so that's what it is in its definition. Here's the example. It's easy to have your memory influenced by what you hear from others, and knowledge of this effect has led to mistrust in the judicial system and the criminal justice system of eyewitness information. So you think you saw, or you think you heard, somebody else was nearby or walked by or drove by or whatever, and they interject, yeah, I saw that or I heard that. And now potentially what you had originally thought or heard changes. What say you? Has that ever happened to you?
I'm so sorry. You kind of cut out. Can you just repeat the question real quick?
I wonder if this has ever happened to you relative to having a thought of something that you saw first, and then somehow you get influenced by somebody else saying, yeah, but that's not how I saw it. I thought I saw this. Has that ever happened to you?
Of course, and I'm trying to think about of an example.
Or you end up changing your mind because of it?
You know,
you're cutting out.
Oh,
there you
sorry.
are.
I guess in general, one of the things that comes to mind is sometimes I see a gender, an age gap or an age gap in my world where we think that the younger nurses maybe don't know enough. But I've been influenced recently with, you know, that they actually have learned some new things in school that I hadn't seen before. So that was one of the biases I think that was able to change is, yeah, maybe they're young so they don't have the experience, but they just got out of school so they have a lot of important new information, and so that I thought was a bias that changed with that information.
Yeah, well, there you go. You know, I'll tell you, and not that I personally, but my parents are at an age where, you know, as their patient care advocate, I'm with them a lot of the times when they have to go to the hospital. And just my perception of the nurses and doctors that are out there today, you know, we got to know U of M very, very well because of a cancer concern with one of the kids living here at home with us. For 2 years, we got to know the U of M Cancer Center. You know, I could tell you where to find the tunnels underneath the building. That's how well we knew it. But what I saw happening is it seems like this specialist was like 22, another specialist was like 31. And I said, well, what happened to the oldies like me? I mean, I want to hear from somebody my age what's happening. And you know, I'm proud to tell you that Reed is cancer-free, and he's gone almost a year now cancer-free. And I would say easily 40 to 50% of the people that took care of him at U of M were all, I would say 30 or under.
Right. That's good to hear, by the way.
All right, so self-serving biases out there. I won't spend a lot of time on that. Let's talk a little bit about what really we want to talk about, and I think we have some time because I can do it in the next 20 minutes. What is specifically implicit and explicit bias? We're also in this session, as we work through the longer version of this session, we get into some real practical structures to reduce and mitigate bias in the workplace. But today we'll simply start with holding ourselves accountable through understanding who we are, why we do the things that we do, and we'll find that we're going to be okay because we're human. And that's not me saying this. That's truly the experts that say that. So let's kick it right off here. The most common bias types are unconscious or implicit. As described by Dr. Greenwald, Anthony G. Greenwald, a psychology professor from the University of Washington, and also Linda Hamilton Krieger, she's a professor of law at the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. And they wrote an article in the 2006 California Law Review related to how the new science of unconscious mental process has a substantial bearing on discrimination law. The theories of implicit bias contrast with the naive psychological conception of social behavior, which views human actors as being guided solely, underlined, by their explicit beliefs and their conscious intentions to act. All right, it's a lot, it's academia. Let me just kind of, what happened in the 50s, what happened in the 40s, and even to some degree into the 60s, say 65, 68-ish, where an explicit bias was what we have seen in our history books. Black people don't eat here. Black people don't go to the restroom here. Segregated schools. See, that's not implicit, that's explicit. That's flat out saying, because of your color, you cannot dine here, you cannot use the restroom here, you cannot go to school here. Right? So that's explicit. And some experts say, you know what? You're better off with someone that's explicitly biased because at least you know where they're coming from. They're telling you, dear nurse, thank you for your feedback, but I'm not believing a word you say until you get me the surgeon in here. And no one likes to hear that, and that's not right. It's not fair, but that's explicit. That's a person telling you right up front. You don't have to wonder about where this person is coming from. What the experts tell us is that this one, implicit bias, is worse. The science of implicit cognition, according to Dr. Greenwald, suggests that actors do not always have a conscious, intentional control over the processes of social perception, impression formation, and judgment that motivates their actions. And so I just want to have that with you because we'll be discussing this in the next couple of minutes. So explicit versus implicit, right? I do want you to know that the dangerous implications of implicit bias is that it automatically seeps into a person's affect or behavior. And so where does it come from? Well, guess what? It's there in front of you on the screen. There is heavy science to support what we're talking about here today. And rather than bore you to pieces with a bunch of medical, although Maureen, you would do very well with understanding all the medical terms. Most people don't. I'm not going to get into that, but to simply say, please do your own due diligence, get out there and research, and you'll find that this is really truly about our brain and our mind, okay? Explicit bias refers to the attitudes and beliefs we have about a person or a group on a conscious level. And here again, not to be redundant, there's your definition for implicit. So here's what we're going to do. We all have biases. I'd like you to listen to Kimberly Papillon. She is a nationally recognized expert on medical, legal, and judicial decision-making. She has served on more than, well, she's a regular faculty at the National Judicial College. She's been there since 2005. And she has delivered more than 300 lectures nationally and internationally on the implications of neuroscience, which I just showed you, psychology, implicit association in decision-making in the fields of medicine, business, education, and the justice system. So, you know, I tried to find someone who is broad-based enough that no matter who my audience was, if you were in any one of those groups, hopefully what she has to say will mean something to you as someone who's been doing this for a very, very long time. So let's take a listen, take some notes, and we'll talk about it right after we're done.
Talk about bias. People often get uncomfortable. The most difficult people to teach fairness to are people who value fairness the most. People who really care about being fair often can push away the idea that there's unconscious bias most vigorously. Talk to a group of people who aren't really in the business of valuing fairness, and you can get a lot further along because you don't have to convince them that unconscious bias actually exists. So fair people, fair-minded people, people who care about egalitarian values, those individuals actually have the most difficulty with unconscious bias. Not so much that they are more biased, but they are less willing sometimes to accept the notion that bias exists and that we all have it. Now, what's interesting about unconscious bias is that it doesn't automatically make us bad people. What it does sometimes is make us do things that don't align with our value system. And the most intelligent people out there are best able to rationalize their decisions that are actually based on unconscious bias and make it seem as if they're based on something else. They're able to create an argument in their mind as to why they did what they did, so that it doesn't look like bias was the basis. So the more education we get, the more analytical we become, the more experienced we are, the better we are in creating an illusion for ourselves that we're not biased. But bias is human. It is inherently human. It's about understanding who we are and how we react to things that we're not familiar with or that we've been taught are negative or frightening. It's our mechanism for survival, but it's antiquated. It goes way back to the time where we were walking around, perhaps in jungles, and we had just a moment to determine if someone was friend or foe. If they were friend, you could sit around and have a grunting conversation. If they were foe, you better run or fight. In a global society, that type of behavior no longer applies. We can't get along that way anymore. We have to become broader in our perspective. But we still have these antiquated notions of how to protect ourselves. And we have to let those go. Those are our unconscious biases. They no longer serve to protect. They now serve to divide. And it's what we don't want. So the first step in the program has got to be to accept that biases exist. Place the guilt to the side and work on a solution together.
All right, so hopefully we took some notes. So let's go through that for just a couple seconds here. What are some things that stuck out in your mind about her remarks? And just to kick start it, I'll share mine. You know, what I always like to share is, guess what? We all have it. We have implicit and explicit biases. It's part of what we grew up with, as she mentioned. It goes way back to the cave people. And we make instant fear-based decisions. And we do something with that thinking process. That's a friend, then here's the action. That's a foe, then here's the action. So we all have it. What did you take out? Did you get any concepts out of that at all, Maureen?
Yeah, okay. Another mind-blowing moment, honestly. The fact that those who think that they're the fairest are the most difficult ones to kind of get their minds around, that they actually are biased, and that's really mind-blowing to me. But I really understand what she was saying. It's a mind blower.
Yeah, isn't it though? And I think, you know, and even when she was talking about seemingly the more educated we get and the more experience we have and kind of the more rigid we become, right?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm thankful. Does it make us bad people, do you think?
I love that she said we have to kind of put that judgment out of our mind, right? And just realize that this is human, and what we need to do is be aware of it. Yeah, absolutely. Really good.
Things that don't align with our value system. You know, one of the things that I had this I had this sister. I was raised in a parochial environment. My father and mother are missionaries, and we've spent the entirety of our lives in the service of others and for them in the Lord's work. For me, secularly, this is what I do. But I had a sister. I won't tell you her name because she wouldn't like it, but she knew me both in the community, getting out there and doing all the great work that the OLA organization does. And she knew me in business because I sat on a board where I felt some of the decision-making was a little too bureaucratic and the slow wheels turn slowly. So my business instincts to like, let's go folks, let's get this done, would take over at some of our meetings. She took me aside one day, and she's a beautiful person. And she says, Ben, do you have a mirror in your office? And before I could answer, she goes, I'm going to bet that you don't because you've never struck me as a vain man. And but do you have a mirror? And I said, no, I don't. She goes, I'm going to encourage you to get one. And I'm not talking about combing your hair in it or checking your tie, although, you know, you want to look good. But I'd like to ask you to look at it and ask yourself before you step out of your office and out into the business world, look in that mirror and ask yourself, which Ben is walking out? Is it the Ben that everybody loves in the community and what his organization does? Is that the Ben that's going to be at the board meeting? Or is it the Ben that has a P&L statement and very business-minded and has to work fast? Which Ben is it? And I'll never forget that conversation because I believe that sometimes we do things, especially me in business, for example, frankly, do not align themselves with how I'd want to be seen by my children, how I'd want to be seen by this sister, how I'd want to be seen by the members in the community that we go out and do good work for. So that's just a personal example of how things that do not align with our value system, it is inherently human. And thank you, Maureen, because you're right. I had picked up, we need to work on a solution together. Now,
Hey, Ben,
we're not going to have, yes.
I had put a question in the chat box, but you know, when you talk about bias is inherently human, is it that unconscious bias is learned behavior, or are you born that way? Because I've seen, you know, videos of babies and children of different races who are very affectionate toward each other, and it makes me believe that it's something that's possibly taught or learned. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, there's no question. If we had the opportunity, I would take us all the way through there. In fact, I'm going to just click on a couple of slides here just to show you where we would have gone. And this slide says it all to your question. Implicit biases are influenced by experiences. And although these attitudes may not be the direct result of a direct personal experience, it's everything from cultural conditioning, media portrayals, our upbringing, all of these things can contribute to that. And so when you consider the why do I do this? What are the tendencies? Just know, and that's the part where we connect to Kimberly Papillon, we're all human, right? And from baby to elderly, we are inundated with all kinds of information and data. And, you know, I'll just, one last personal consideration. So I never saw my father in anything other than a long sleeve white shirt, a button-up shirt, pants, slacks were usually a dark color in nature. They wear no rings. They don't wear jewelry of any kind. My mother has never cut her hair that I know of. She wears it up in a bun. And of course, you know, they're teetotalers. They don't smoke, they don't drink, they don't do any of that kind of stuff. How do you think when I first went into business and I went to the Ann Arbor neck of the woods and I had to hire people, what do you think some of my biases as I grew up were about the people that were being interviewed to do work for me? What do you think, if you just want to take a stab, what would be an ideal looking candidate to me?
Go ahead,
What's
Sheila.
that?
I was going to say something similar to how you were raised. Like if you saw somebody with facial piercings, you were probably not considering them for, you know, a job candidate.
Yeah, and I use Ann Arbor on purpose because in the absence of policies, what is the tendency for employers to do? And thank God we have great HR policies that don't let facial piercings, multicolored hair, you know, any of those preferences creep into decision making. And I'm thankful for that because some of the best customer service people I've ever had the chance to work with were people that if I've never seen in my dad's church. How's that? Does that make sense?
Right. Absolutely.
So we are susceptible to the tendencies, and unfortunately, my time is drawing near. I would like to take just a few minutes to let you watch the following, and when you watch this, know that we still have a lot of ground to cover, and so if you want more, please let us know. There's a tremendous amount of application, personal application, workplace application. There's guidance. There's a tremendous amount of information left to help us understand why we do what we do, and then what are the actions that we can take to hold ourselves accountable now that we have this information. So let me just get to, not Dr. Jerry King, because he will take too long, but I'd like you to listen to this comment here by Dr. Wells.
There's some.
I love this one because this one is a little close.
Huge decision that you may make.
So Dr. Well is known throughout the technological community as an expert in the field of implicit and explicit bias. And he is the head of, let's just call it people at Google. And he brings up a really good point how some people, you know, those that have the egalitarian, you know, kind of feeling say, well, I'm just a little bit biased. I'm just a little biased. And it's okay, because I'm human. And I would caution us, and I'll leave you with this, knowing full well that I haven't barely scraped the surface of bias. And in the interest that if you're interested in more, please contact the organization that you found out about this one, and we will be happy to get back in contact with you and give you the full session. But just listen to this as we depart today.
Huge decision that you may make. It's just, you're not going to say, I am not going to hire someone because she's a woman. You're going to say, I'm not going to hire someone because she doesn't seem to have the same qualifications as this next person, right? It's more subtle. And so some people have said that, okay, you've demonstrated bias. I get it, this implicit association test works. But even if it is expressed in the workplace, it would be so small as to not have any tangible effect whatsoever. And so in response, researchers said, you know, let's see what the cumulative effect of the smallest expression of bias would have on the representation of men and women within an organization. And so he had created actually a computer simulation. In the simulation, there was a company that had 8 levels. Level 1 was the most junior level. Level 8 was the most senior level. And he started the computer simulation with 50-50 men and women. So on the yellow bar here is women, the blue is men. And then he said, okay, I'm going to program 15% attrition at every single one of the levels. And the way that I'm going to fill that attrition is to pull somebody up from the level below. The way that I'm going to determine who to pull up is based on their performance score. So everybody in this computer simulation had a randomly generated performance score that ranged from about 1 to 100. But he programmed 1% of the variance in those performance scores biased against women, just 1%. So you can think of this as women receiving a performance score on anywhere from 1 to 100, and men receiving a performance score anywhere from 1 to 101. That's it. So he ran the simulation until every original member of this organization was gone and replaced by someone new, and the lowest level was always replaced at 50%. And they did it 20 times, and he averaged the results. And here's what you see. 1% of bias in performance score ends up skewing the distribution of women at the top to 35% at the very top of the organization. Tiny bias. Now, this exact same pyramidal structure is what we see in corporate America. Almost any single organization you will go to, you will see a skew starting against women at the very top. Now, it doesn't mean that that is only the result of bias. There are other factors in play, but I think we would be naive to say that bias doesn't play some role in there whatsoever. So why does it matter? It matters because women have great ideas. Women can be amazing leaders. And the research is showing that when we have gender diversity at the very top of organizations, it actually drives all of the metrics that shareholders care about. Return on equity, return to shareholders, all sorts of things. It's also true that the kinds of teams that we're a part of are the ones that will benefit most from diversity. So complex decision making, innovation, these things are better when we have diversity represented than when they're not. And it's not only that having a woman in a group or an African American in a group or an older person in a group of younger people, it's not only that that person contributes something unique. Research shows that everybody else contributes something unique. So you actually act differently in a diverse group than you will in a group of people exactly like yourself. You will overemphasize the qualities that you have in common when all of you are the same, and you'll actually feel freer to express something that's different when you have different people in the group. So we have this incentive to have diversity, and yet we also know that we're inclined through our biases and through our heuristics to keep diversity at a minimum. So that is what we're trying to grapple with here at Google. And we have some suggestions for how we can overcome bias to achieve this diversity. So your job today is to commit to one action. So we're going to go through a ton of research, and we're going to have 4 different ways that you can combat bias. What we're starting to realize is 4 is a lot, and the detail in this presentation is a lot. So if you just pick one thing that resonates with you, and then say to yourself, I'm going to work on that one thing, you'll actually be less biased. So don't try to do everything. Try to do the one thing.
All right. So thank you guys for your time. I will tell you that the one thing I would encourage you to do is learn more. Do your homework. Google it. There are some really wonderful resources. The one that I would ask you to get is Blind Spot by Dr. Banaji Mahadran. You can get it, and it's I think $11, $12 online at Amazon, and that's that one action. Learn more, and you're on your way to a great journey on understanding your implicit bias and how you can mitigate bias in the workplace. So thank you very much. Thank you, Maureen, for participating. Really appreciated your time. If you have any questions at all, shoot me an email. It's benegron@gmail.com. benegron@gmail.com. Have a great rest of the afternoon.